The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the cracked, uneven sidewalk. Ethan, a 10-year-old boy with a determined look in his eyes, sat still in his wheelchair, struggling to push the worn-out wheels forward. The wheelchair had been his constant companion for most of his young life, but over the past few months, it had begun to falter. The motor that powered it had started to sputter, and the once smooth wheels now creaked with every turn. Ethan's fingers gripped the armrests tightly as he pushed the joystick forward. The chair jerked, then came to an abrupt stop. His frustration was growing, but he didn't show it. He never did. For Ethan, frustration was just another feeling he had learned to suppress. After all, he'd faced challenges all his life. His condition, muscular dystrophy, had stolen much from him, but it had never stolen his spirit. His mother, Claire, walked beside him, her eyes clouded with worry. She'd seen the toll the disease had taken on her son, and she had witnessed how every little challenge had become a mountain to climb for him. The wheelchair was supposed to make life easier, but now it felt like a constant reminder of their struggle. "Ethan, sweetheart, let's go back inside," Claire said softly, her voice filled with concern. "We'll try again tomorrow." But Ethan shook his head, refusing to give in. "I can do it, Mom," he said, his voice tinged with the stubbornness that had always defined him. "I just need to figure out why it's stuck." Claire watched him, her heart heavy with both pride and sadness. She knew how hard it was for him. She had already reached out to several repair shops, but the cost of fixing the wheelchair was far beyond what she could afford. She had thought about selling the chair and finding a cheaper one, but the thought of starting over was overwhelming. She wanted so badly to help him, but what could she do? Her own job didn't pay nearly enough, and every month seemed to bring more bills, more unexpected expenses. As Claire turned her gaze toward the street, she noticed something that almost made her freeze in place. A man was standing across the road, watching them. He was dressed in a simple mechanic's uniform, his hands resting on his hips. There was something about him, an ordinary man, yet his presence seemed to have a quiet strength. He was tall, with short cropped hair and a weathered face that looked like he had seen more than his fair share of life's hardships. He watched them for a moment, then stepped forward without hesitation, crossing the street toward them. Claire's instincts told her to be cautious, but there was something in his eyes that made her hesitate. She could feel Ethan's frustration mounting beside her as the wheelchair failed to budge again. "Excuse me," the man called out, his voice deep and calm. "Is everything okay?" Claire took a step back, unsure of what to say. We're fine, just trying to fix my son's wheelchair," she explained, gesturing to the chair. "But it's been giving us trouble for a while now." The man nodded, stepping closer. "I'm a mechanic," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "If you'd like, I can take a look at it for you." "No charge." Claire blinked in surprise. "No charge?" The idea of getting something for free was almost foreign to her. She had spent so many years scrimping and saving just to make ends meet, always expecting to pay for everything. A free repair felt like a dream. I don't understand," Claire said, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Why would you do that?" The man shrugged. "I'm just helping out. It's what I do." Ethan had been quiet, watching the exchange between his mother and the stranger. He had seen people pass by, some offering pitying looks, others simply ignoring him. But this man was different. He wasn't just offering words, he was offering action. Ethan's voice was small, almost hesitant. "You can fix it?" The mechanic smiled and knelt down beside the chair. "I can certainly try. I've fixed a lot of things in my time." Claire looked between her son and the stranger. Something about the man's demeanor made her feel safe, almost as though she could trust him. She glanced at Ethan, who was now looking at the man with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. It was rare for Ethan to show hope for something as simple as a wheelchair repair. He had become accustomed to disappointment. "All right," Claire said, her voice still uncertain but trusting. "If you're sure, go ahead." The mechanic smiled, then began working on the wheelchair without another word. His hands moved expertly, inspecting the wheels, the motor, and the wiring. Claire stood off to the side, watching him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She had expected this to take hours, but the man worked quickly, his focus sharp, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. Ethan sat silently, his fingers still gripping the armrests, as the mechanic tightened screws and replaced wires. Claire couldn't help but wonder what kind of man this was, offering his help so freely. She had been so wary of strangers for so long, but this man seemed to carry an air of reliability and care that she hadn't seen in a long time. After what felt like only a few minutes, the mechanic stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "There," he said with a satisfied nod. "Try it now." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise as the motor hummed to life, the wheels spinning smoothly without any hesitation. He pushed the joystick forward, and the chair glided effortlessly. His face lit up with a smile, a rare and beautiful sight. "Wow, it's working!" Ethan exclaimed, his voice filled with pure joy. Claire watched her son in amazement, feeling a lump rise in her throat. This small act of kindness had brought her son more happiness than she could have imagined. She turned to the mechanic, a deep sense of gratitude in her heart. "Thank you," she said softly. "You have no idea how much this means to us." The mechanic smiled and waved off her thanks. "It's no trouble at all. I'm just glad I could help." Claire offered him some money, but he shook his head. "No need for that. Like I said, I just wanted to help out." Ethan looked up at the man, his eyes full of curiosity. "Who are you?" The mechanic hesitated for a moment, as if unsure of how to answer. Finally, he simply said, "Just a guy who fixes things." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the street before either Claire or Ethan could say another word. As the mechanic disappeared from sight, Claire and Ethan stood in silence for a moment, both lost in the surreal nature of what had just happened. Ethan looked at his mother, his face still glowing with the joy of a simple repair that meant so much to him. "Mom, that man was really nice," Ethan said, his voice full of wonder. Claire nodded, still in shock at how quickly everything had changed. "Yes, he was. But, there's something strange about it, don't you think?" Ethan turned back to his chair, running his hands over the smooth wheels. "I don't know." He seemed like he really wanted to help. Before Claire could respond, a low rumble of sound caught her attention. She turned to look at the sky, her eyes squinting as a plane soared overhead. It was unusual for any planes to fly low over their neighborhood. She frowned, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The sound grew louder, and Claire's heart skipped a beat when she realized that the plane wasn't just flying overhead, it was descending, heading straight for their small town. She glanced down at Ethan, who was now looking up with the same confused expression on his face. The plane touched down just a few miles away, near the edge of town. Days passed, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. That mechanic's unexpected appearance and the strange plane had left a lingering question in her mind. Who was he really? And why had he helped them? Then, the next day, the jet returned. But this time, it wasn't just a plane landing, it was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would change everything. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Claire found herself staring out of her kitchen window, her mind still reeling from the events of the previous days. It had been 2 days since the mechanic, Mark, had fixed Ethan's wheelchair for free. It was hard to believe how a simple act of kindness could change their lives in such a short time. Ethan was happier than he had been in months, the wheelchair moving smoothly, almost like new. It felt like a weight had been lifted off Claire's shoulders. But something gnawed at her, a sense of unease she couldn't shake. The way Mark had appeared out of nowhere, offering his help so freely, was too coincidental. The strange jet that had flown into their small town just after he left, it all felt like a puzzle she couldn't quite put together. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, when Ethan bounded into the room. His bright smile was infectious, and for a moment, she forgot about the nagging questions in her mind. "Mom, can we go outside? I want to try my chair on the sidewalk again," Ethan said, his excitement bubbling over. Claire nodded, her heart lifting as she looked at her son. He was so full of life today, so different from the boy who had struggled so much just days before. "All right, but just for a little while," she replied, setting her coffee aside and standing up. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so hopeful. As they stepped outside into the cool morning air, Claire looked up at the sky, her eyes catching the faint hum of an aircraft in the distance. The low rumble had become a familiar sound in the last few days, but today it seemed louder, more distinct. "Mom, what's that?" Ethan asked, pointing toward the sky, his face filled with curiosity. Claire followed his gaze and saw a jet cutting through the clouds, its sleek, silver body gleaming in the sunlight. It was descending quickly, and it wasn't just any small plane, it was a private jet. Her heart skipped a beat. Claire had lived in this small town for years, and there was no reason for a private jet to be here. The only other times she had seen such planes were in the movies, or when they passed overhead on their way to a nearby airport. But this one was heading directly for their town. Claire's stomach churned. The strange mechanic, Mark, had fixed Ethan's wheelchair, and then a jet had appeared. Could the two events be connected? And if so, what was the connection? "Mom, why's it landing here?" Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Claire glanced at him, trying to keep her composure. "I'm not sure, sweetheart. We'll find out soon enough." The jet touched down with a smooth, controlled landing, its engines humming as it came to a stop on the small airstrip just outside of town. Claire felt a chill run down her spine as she watched. There was something about this that felt off. A feeling she couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. Ethan, on the other hand, was fascinated. "Wow, look at that, Mom. It's so big. Who do you think's on it?" Claire forced a smile, trying to hide her own growing concern. "I don't know, honey. Maybe someone important." But as they stood there, watching the jet's doors open, Claire noticed something she hadn't expected. A group of people was emerging from the jet. They weren't dressed in the typical business suits one might expect from wealthy travelers. Instead, they were dressed in dark, uniform-like clothing, each one exuding an air of quiet authority. They moved with purpose, scanning the area as they made their way toward a waiting car. Claire's curiosity got the better of her, and she motioned for Ethan to follow her. "Let's go take a look," she said, her voice tinged with an unease she couldn't shake. Ethan, oblivious to his mother's tension, eagerly wheeled himself forward, his wheelchair gliding easily across the pavement. They walked toward the edge of the airstrip, where a small crowd had begun to gather, also curious about the arrival. "What do you think they're doing here?" Ethan asked, his voice full of wonder. Claire glanced around, her eyes darting from one person to the next. "I'm not sure, but we'll figure it out," she said, her tone more confident than she felt. As they reached the perimeter of the small crowd, Claire saw that the group from the jet had gathered around a large black SUV. The vehicle's tinted windows made it impossible to see who was inside, but Claire could feel the tension in the air. The people standing around the car were talking in hushed tones, exchanging brief, almost secretive looks. They were clearly waiting for something, or someone. Then, just as Claire thought she might turn around and leave, she saw him. Mark, the mechanic. He had appeared from nowhere again, walking toward the group with his hands in his pockets, his head slightly lowered as if he were trying to blend in. But it was impossible not to notice him. The man who had fixed Ethan's wheelchair for free had returned, and he wasn't just a mechanic. He was someone else. Someone important. Claire's heart raced. What was going on? Why was Mark here, and why were these people waiting for him? Before she could make sense of it all, Mark looked up and spotted Claire and Ethan in the crowd. His face didn't show surprise, but there was something in his eyes, something unreadable. His gaze lingered for a moment before he turned and walked toward them, his footsteps steady and deliberate. Claire's throat tightened as he approached. "Mark," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Mark smiled, but it wasn't the same warm, friendly smile he had given them when he fixed Ethan's wheelchair. There was something guarded in his expression now, as if he were a different person altogether. "Claire, Ethan," he said, his voice low but cordial. "I didn't expect to see you here. I suppose you're wondering what all this is about." Ethan's eyes lit up when he saw Mark. "Hey, you fixed my chair. It's working great. Thank you so much." Mark nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at Ethan. "I'm glad to hear that. It's the least I could do." Claire hesitated, her mind racing. "But, what's all this?" She gestured toward the SUV and the people gathered around it. "Who are they? And why are you here?" Mark took a deep breath, glancing over his shoulder at the group. He didn't seem to want to reveal much, but there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke volumes. He stepped closer to Claire and Ethan, lowering his voice. "I can't tell you everything right now," he said, his words measured. "But what you need to know is that I didn't just fix your son's wheelchair for the sake of being kind. There's a bigger reason." Claire's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" she demanded. "Who are you really? What's going on?" Mark hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously toward the others, who were still waiting by the SUV. He turned back to Claire and lowered his voice even further. "Let's just say, you're going to be part of something bigger than you could ever imagine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't just about a broken wheelchair. This is about something that has been set in motion, something that you're now involved in whether you like it or not." Before Claire could ask any more questions, Mark straightened up, his expression turning serious. "I need to go. But I'll be in touch. Soon." Without another word, he turned and walked back toward the group, disappearing into the crowd of people who had gathered around the SUV. Claire stood there, stunned, her mind racing. What did he mean by all that? Something bigger? Involved? The only thing she knew for sure was that their lives were about to change in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. Ethan, oblivious to the depth of the conversation, was still staring at the spot where Mark had disappeared. "What do you think he meant, Mom?" Claire took a deep breath, her mind struggling to piece together the puzzle that had only just begun. She had no answers, just more questions. But she knew one thing for certain. They were no longer just bystanders in this strange story. They were part of it now. And whatever was coming next, they had better be ready. The next few days passed in a blur, and Claire couldn't shake the strange, unsettling feeling that had settled over her. She couldn't stop thinking about Mark and his cryptic words, "You're going to be part of something bigger than you could ever imagine." Ethan was still blissfully unaware of the gravity of the situation, enjoying the newfound smoothness of his wheelchair. He spent his days outside, racing up and down the sidewalk, laughing as he maneuvered around the tree in the yard. Claire watched him with a mixture of relief and unease. It was like he had returned to his old self, full of energy and joy. But every time she saw him zooming around, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. Claire tried to keep the creeping sense of dread at bay. She wanted to enjoy these moments with Ethan, wanted to bask in the happiness that came with seeing her son so carefree, but the pull of something bigger, something darker, kept tugging at her. It was a Thursday afternoon when the phone rang. Claire had been at the kitchen table, trying to get some work done while keeping an eye on Ethan outside, when the shrill sound of the phone startled her. She glanced at the caller ID. It was an unknown number. For a moment, she hesitated. But then her curiosity got the better of her, and she answered the call. "Hello?" There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a deep, familiar voice. "Claire." "It's Mark." Claire's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from him since the day the jet had landed, and she hadn't expected him to call. "Mark," she said, her voice steady but laced with suspicion. "What's going on? You said you'd be in touch, but you didn't say when or why." Mark's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency. "Listen, Claire, I need you to meet me. There are things you need to know, things that are happening right now that you can't ignore." Claire felt a wave of unease wash over her. She glanced at Ethan, who was still playing outside, oblivious to the phone call. "What is it? What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "It's better if I explain it in person," Mark replied, his voice low. "There's a lot I can't say over the phone. I'll meet you at the old diner on Maple Street in 1 hour. Don't tell anyone. Just you." The line went silent for a moment, and Claire's mind raced. She couldn't figure out what to make of this. Why meet her in secret? Why not just tell her what was happening? "I don't know, Mark," Claire said, her voice wavering. "This is all so strange. You're telling me that my son and I are part of something bigger, but you won't even explain what that means." "Claire," Mark interrupted, his tone softening. "You need to trust me. Please. Just meet me. I promise you'll understand everything soon." With a deep sigh, Claire glanced at Ethan again. He was still playing, his wheelchair gliding effortlessly over the uneven sidewalk. Part of her wanted to protect him, to keep him safe from whatever madness was unfolding. But another part of her knew that this was bigger than her, bigger than Ethan. There was no turning back. "Okay," Claire finally said. "I'll be there." An hour later, Claire pulled into the parking lot of the old diner on Maple Street. The place had been around for as long as she could remember, an unassuming building with neon lights and an old-fashioned charm. But tonight, it felt different. There was a chill in the air, the kind that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Claire glanced around as she parked, her eyes darting to the dark street behind her. Everything felt too quiet, too still. Like the calm before a storm. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the diner, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The small bell above the door jingled as she entered, and the waitress behind the counter glanced up, but said nothing. The diner was empty, save for a man sitting in the far corner booth. "Mark." He waved at her, his expression unreadable. Claire walked over to him, her heart beating faster with each step. She slid into the booth across from him, trying to steady her breath. "Mark," she said quietly. "What is going on? What do you mean, something bigger?" Mark looked around the diner, his eyes scanning the room before he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You have to understand, Claire," he said slowly, "this isn't just about you or Ethan. It's not even about me. This is about something much larger, something that's been set in motion for years. You and your son are involved because you're connected to something, something that could change everything." Claire frowned. "Connected to what? I don't understand." Mark glanced around again, checking to see if anyone was listening, before continuing. "The jet that landed, the people who were on it, those aren't just ordinary passengers. They're part of an organization, one that operates in the shadows. I'm part of it too. But I'm not just any member. I've been sent here for a specific reason." Claire's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, sent here? Are you saying this is all planned?" Mark nodded slowly, his eyes locked onto Claire's. "Yes. This has been in the works for years. Your son, Ethan, he has something that we need." Claire's blood ran cold. "What does Ethan have? What do you want from him?" Mark leaned back in the booth, exhaling a deep breath. I know this is hard to believe, but your son is part of a very specific group of people. He has abilities, Claire. Abilities that could change the course of history. Claire blinked, her mind struggling to grasp what Mark was saying. Abilities? Ethan's just a kid. He's just like any other kid, except for his condition. Mark shook his head. No, Claire. There's more to him than you realize. His condition, his muscular dystrophy, it's not what it seems. It's actually the result of a special genetic trait. A trait that's been passed down through generations. And it's why we've been watching him. Claire's head was spinning. You're telling me that Ethan has special abilities because of his genetic makeup? And that this whole thing has been planned? What kind of abilities are you talking about? Mark hesitated for a moment, then looked Claire in the eye. Ethan has the ability to heal, Claire. He has the power to heal people in ways that no one else can. It's why we're here. The words hit Claire like a punch to the stomach. She stared at Mark, her mind trying to piece together what he had just said. Ethan, her sweet, kind-hearted son, could heal people? How was that even possible? Are you saying that his wheelchair was part of this? Claire asked, her voice trembling. Is that why it broke down in the first place? Mark nodded. Exactly. His wheelchair malfunctioned because it was tied to his ability. The energy he exudes when he uses it is unpredictable. The wheelchair couldn't handle it anymore, and that's when I came in. Claire's mind raced. So you knew all along? You knew what Ethan was capable of? Mark's face softened. I didn't know the full extent of his abilities, but I suspected. I've been part of this organization for years, Claire. And we've been tracking people like Ethan for a long time. But your son is different. He's special. Claire sat back in her booth, her mind reeling. She couldn't comprehend what Mark was telling her. Ethan could heal people? That was impossible. It was something out of a fantasy novel, not her real life. I don't know what to believe, Claire whispered, her voice shaking. This is too much, Mark. How can this be true? Mark sighed, his eyes filled with a mix of sympathy and regret. I know it's a lot to take in. But the truth is, Ethan is now a part of something much bigger than either of us. There are people out there who want to use his ability, people who will stop at nothing to get their hands on him. And that's why you need to protect him. Claire looked at Mark, her eyes wide with disbelief. Protect him from what? Mark's voice grew more serious. There are powerful forces at work, Claire. People who want to use Ethan's gift for their own gain. They'll do whatever it takes to control him. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to help protect him. The diner was eerily quiet as Mark's words hung in the air. Claire couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the gravity of the situation sunk in. Ethan had powers? Her son, the boy who struggled every day with his muscular dystrophy, could heal people? It was the kind of thing you read about in stories, not something that could possibly be real. But Mark's face was unwavering. He wasn't joking. He wasn't trying to pull her leg or spin a wild tale. He was serious. Her son, her little boy, who had fought for every step he had taken, could heal. Mark's gaze softened as he watched her process what he had just revealed. He knew she would be in shock. Who wouldn't be? But they didn't have time for her to come to terms with it. Time was running out. Claire, Mark said quietly, breaking the silence. I know this is overwhelming, but you have to understand. There are people out there, dangerous people, who want to use Ethan. They'll stop at nothing to get him. His ability is too valuable. Claire's mind raced, and she tried to focus on the present, to understand the urgency in Mark's voice. But why him? Why Ethan? She asked, still in disbelief. Why would anyone want him? He's just a little boy. Not just any little boy, Mark said, his voice steady. His ability isn't just about healing. It's about energy. The kind of energy that can change the course of life and death. Ethan's gift, it's not something that can be controlled easily. And because of that, it's dangerous. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could be catastrophic. Claire shook her head. This is too much. I can't. Claire, you don't have a choice, Mark cut her off, his tone firm. You're already in it. You're already involved. And now, we have to protect Ethan, no matter the cost. For the first time, Claire saw the true weight of what Mark was saying. This wasn't just about her son's health anymore. This was about something far bigger. Something dangerous. She had never asked for any of this. She had just wanted a quiet life with her son. And now it felt like the entire world was changing around her. What are you asking me to do, Mark? Claire whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She had spent so many years trying to protect Ethan, trying to keep him safe from the world's cruelty. How was she supposed to protect him from something like this? You need to trust me, Mark replied, leaning closer. You need to keep Ethan safe. We'll move him, hide him if we have to. But the most important thing is that we don't let those people find him. Claire wanted to argue, wanted to deny it all. But deep down, she knew there was no denying the truth. Ethan was special. And Mark had just confirmed it. But the question still lingered, how could she protect him from something so much bigger than both of them? The next day, Claire couldn't get the conversation with Mark out of her head. She spent the morning pacing around the house, her mind racing with everything she had learned. Ethan had no idea what was coming. He was still out in the yard, racing around in his wheelchair, as if nothing had changed. How could she tell him? How could she explain to her son that his life, his entire future, was now in danger? For a brief moment, Claire wished she could just tell Ethan the truth. That she could pull him close and protect him from the madness. But she knew that wasn't the way forward. She couldn't afford to panic. Ethan couldn't know the truth yet. Not until she had a plan. A way to keep him safe. Later that afternoon, Mark called again. Claire, he said, his voice grim. They're coming. They know about Ethan. The word sent a shock of fear through Claire's chest. Her pulse quickened. How do you know? I have my sources, Mark replied. They're getting closer. We don't have much time. You need to get Ethan out of town. Now. Claire's mind was spinning. I can't just leave. Ethan has school, his life. Forget everything else, Mark interrupted. Right now, it's just about survival. I'll meet you at your house in an hour. Pack what you can. Just you and Ethan. Get ready to go. I'll explain everything when I get there. Claire's stomach tightened as she hung up the phone. The last few days had been like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. And now, it felt like they were in a race against time. There was no going back. There was no turning around. Ethan's life was at risk, and she had to act. An hour later, Claire and Ethan were packed and waiting in the living room when Mark arrived. He looked different now, more intense. His face was drawn, and there was a sense of urgency in his movements that Claire hadn't seen before. We don't have much time, Mark said, his eyes scanning the room before he locked eyes with Claire. We need to leave. Now. Claire felt her heart pound in her chest. She grabbed Ethan's hand and squeezed it. Ethan, listen to me, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. We're going on a trip, okay? I need you to stay close to me, and don't ask too many questions. Ethan looked at her, confused. Where are we going, Mom? Claire forced a smile, her stomach twisting with guilt. We're just going to visit some family for a little while. It'll be an adventure, okay? Ethan didn't seem to fully understand, but he trusted his mother. He always had. "Okay, Mom," he said, nodding eagerly. "An adventure sounds fun." Mark motioned toward the door. "Let's go." They walked out into the yard, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. Claire's car was packed, and Mark had already started his own vehicle, a nondescript van that looked like it could blend in anywhere. They needed to be as invisible as possible. As they pulled out of the driveway, Claire glanced at Ethan in the rearview mirror. He was sitting quietly, his face pressed against the window as he looked out at the passing scenery. She wished she could tell him the truth, but the fear of what would happen if she did kept her silent. After several miles, Mark spoke again, his voice low and steady. "We're heading to a safe house. It's a place where no one can find us. But you have to understand, Claire, this is just the beginning. They'll be searching for us. And we'll have to keep moving." Claire's stomach dropped. She hadn't realized just how dangerous this all was. It wasn't just about protecting Ethan anymore, it was about survival. But she had no choice. She couldn't let anything happen to her son. Mark turned onto a secluded road, the trees growing thicker on either side. The world around them felt different, quieter, as if the weight of what was happening had settled in. Claire's eyes darted to the rearview mirror again, checking for any signs of pursuit. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the engine as they drove deeper into the unknown. Minutes later, they arrived at the safe house, a small, nondescript cabin tucked away in the woods. It looked harmless enough, but Claire knew better now. Nothing was as it seemed. Mark pulled the van into the driveway and stopped. He turned to Claire, his face grim. "We'll be safe here for a while. But we can't stay long. You need to stay vigilant. There's no telling when they'll come for us." Claire nodded, trying to keep her composure. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure, she would do anything to protect Ethan. The safe house was a far cry from the life Claire had known. The small, secluded cabin nestled in the dense woods seemed to be the epitome of isolation. Its wooden exterior, although well-maintained, appeared weathered and worn by years of neglect. The windows were tightly shut, the curtains drawn, creating a sense of claustrophobia. But, it was the best place they could be for now. At least, for as long as they could stay hidden. The first night in the cabin passed in uneasy silence. Claire had a difficult time falling asleep. Her mind was overwhelmed with thoughts of Ethan, the danger he faced, and the overwhelming truth Mark had shared with her. Ethan's ability to heal, the implications were enormous, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized just how little she understood about what was really happening. She watched him sleeping soundly on the couch, his soft breaths echoing in the otherwise still room. He was so innocent, so unaware of the weight he carried. Claire longed to protect him, to shield him from the world's darkness, but she didn't know how. She had been thrust into a situation she wasn't prepared for, one that seemed impossible to navigate. Mark had left earlier that morning, promising to return soon with supplies. Claire was left alone with Ethan, unsure of what their next move should be. She had never felt more helpless. As she sat at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't as safe as Mark had promised. It was as if an invisible presence was lurking just beyond the walls, watching their every move. Her instincts told her that they couldn't stay in one place for long. The people chasing them would never stop. They would never give up. Then, the sound of a car engine broke her train of thought. Claire's heart raced. She immediately stood up and rushed to the window, peering through the crack in the curtains. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the dirt road that led to the cabin. A black SUV was slowly approaching. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. It was too soon for Mark to return. Could it be them? Could the people after Ethan have found them already? Without wasting another second, Claire grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him to the farthest corner of the cabin. She tried to keep her voice steady as she whispered, "Stay quiet. Don't make a sound, Ethan. We have to stay hidden." Ethan looked up at her, his wide eyes filled with confusion. "What's going on, Mom?" "Just stay here," she said softly, pushing him into the corner behind an old wardrobe. "I'll keep you safe." Claire's pulse quickened as she listened to the sound of the SUV coming closer. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear any movement outside. The vehicle came to a stop, and for a long moment, the silence hung heavy in the air. Claire's breath hitched as the sound of doors opening reached her ears. She could hear footsteps crunching on the gravel. The unmistakable sound of boots. There were at least 2 of them. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she instinctively reached for the knife that Mark had left on the counter. She wasn't trained for situations like this, but she would do whatever it took to protect Ethan. The footsteps grew louder. Closer. Claire moved to the kitchen window, parting the curtains just enough to see outside. Her stomach dropped when she saw 2 men standing by the SUV, scanning the area. They were wearing black suits, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses. They looked professional, too professional. They weren't here for a friendly visit. Claire's mind raced. They had to be here for Ethan. Mark had warned her, but now, it was happening. The threat was real. And it was much worse than she had ever imagined. One of the men gestured toward the cabin, and the other nodded. Slowly, they began walking toward the front door. Claire's heart was in her throat. There was no time to waste. She had to act. She had to protect Ethan. Without thinking, she grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward the back of the cabin, where there was a small door that led out into the woods. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. As she opened the door, the faintest sound reached her ears, voices. The men were outside, calling out to her. Her grip tightened around Ethan's hand as she pulled him into the trees, away from the cabin. She couldn't let them find her son. The dense forest surrounded them, the trees thick with branches that nearly blocked out the sky. Claire didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. She had to get them as far away from the cabin as possible. The longer they stayed, the more danger they were in. Ethan struggled to keep up, his legs still weak from the effects of his condition. Claire didn't dare slow down. Every step felt like a race against time. She could hear the men's footsteps behind them, getting closer with each passing second. Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence. "Stop. We know you're out there." Claire's heart skipped a beat. She didn't stop. She couldn't. If she did, they'd catch them for sure. "We just want to talk," one of the men shouted. But Claire knew better. They didn't want to talk. They wanted Ethan. They wanted to take him. And she would never let that happen. They kept running through the forest, the sounds of pursuit growing louder. Every muscle in Claire's body screamed for her to stop, but she couldn't. Not when Ethan was in danger. Just as she thought they couldn't run any farther, she spotted a small stream up ahead. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She turned to Ethan, her face pale with fear. "Ethan, can you swim?" she asked urgently. He nodded, his expression filled with confusion. "I think so." "Good," Claire said, grabbing him by the arm. "We need to cross the stream. It will cover our tracks." Ethan didn't ask any more questions. He just followed his mother as she led him into the cold water. The current was swift, but Claire didn't care. The sounds of pursuit were fading, but she knew they couldn't stop yet. The stream would help throw off their trail, but they had to get as far as possible before the men realized where they had gone. They crossed the stream in silence, Claire keeping a tight grip on Ethan's hand as they made their way deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to stretch on forever, but Claire didn't dare slow down. She didn't know how long they had before the men found them again. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, the forest began to thin. The sound of rushing water faded as they neared the edge of the woods. Claire's legs were burning with exhaustion and Ethan's pace was slowing. But she didn't stop. When they finally broke free from the trees and onto a dirt road, Claire looked around, trying to get her bearings. She didn't know where they were, but she knew one thing: they had to keep moving. They couldn't stay here for long. Just as Claire was about to speak, a distant sound reached her ears: a car engine. Claire's heart skipped a beat as she turned her head. In the distance, she could see the silhouette of a vehicle approaching. No, she whispered to herself. Not again. But this time, it wasn't an SUV. It was a car, a familiar one. A beat-up blue sedan that had been parked in front of their old house. Mark. Claire felt a rush of relief flood her chest as she recognized him behind the wheel. He had come back for them. She waved frantically, and Mark's car slowed as it approached. The moment it stopped, Claire rushed toward it, pulling Ethan with her. "Get in, now," Mark ordered, his voice sharp. "We don't have much time." Without another word, Claire and Ethan climbed into the back seat, and Mark sped off down the road. The car bounced over the uneven ground, but it didn't matter. They were safe, for now. The car sped down the narrow, winding road, the wheels crunching on gravel, the engine's hum filling the air. Claire sat in the back seat, holding Ethan's hand tightly, her mind still racing. Mark was driving with a sense of urgency that matched Claire's mounting panic. She could feel the tension in the car, thick as a storm about to break. Ethan, exhausted from the chase, had curled up against her side, his face pale, but his eyes wide open. He had been through so much in such a short time, and Claire could see it in the way he held himself. The innocent joy he had once radiated was slowly being replaced with confusion, fear, and uncertainty. Claire had always known that raising Ethan would be a challenge, but this was a nightmare she couldn't have prepared for. The danger was real. The people who were after them, Mark's warnings had been clear. They were after Ethan for his gift, a gift that could change everything. Could heal, could destroy, could rewrite fate. Claire had never imagined something so big, so unimaginable could be part of her son's life. As the trees began to thin and the road straightened, Mark spoke again, his voice clipped. "We're almost there. We'll be safe for now, but the truth," he paused, swallowing hard. "The truth about what's been happening, it's more complicated than I let on." Claire's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, more complicated?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mark's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel, and for a moment, he didn't respond. The silence between them was heavy, thick with secrets and half-spoken words. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. She had to know the truth now. There was no more time to wait, no more time for half-answers. Ethan's life was at stake, and she couldn't let the shadows keep looming over them. "I didn't just come to you because I knew about Ethan's gift," Mark said, his voice softer now. "I came to you because I've been involved in this world longer than I ever wanted to be. I've worked for a lot of different organizations, government, private sector, all of them. And for years, I've seen things that no one should have ever seen." Claire listened intently, leaning forward. "What things?" Mark's gaze flickered to the rearview mirror as if searching for something. His eyes narrowed, and he shook his head. "You don't understand, Claire. You're in this now. And you need to hear everything, all of it. The world is bigger than you think, and Ethan is a part of something that goes back decades." Claire could feel the weight of his words press on her chest. She squeezed Ethan's hand again, trying to reassure herself as much as him. The fear was suffocating. "There's a group," Mark continued, his voice quiet, almost like he was speaking more to himself than to her. "They've been researching people like Ethan for years, children born with special abilities. They call it the gifted generation, but it's not just about healing. Some of them can manipulate elements, others can control minds. They've been studying them, trying to figure out how to harness these abilities, how to weaponize them. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Weaponize? You mean, use Ethan? Mark nodded grimly. Exactly. Ethan's gift is one of the most powerful. It doesn't just heal, it alters the fundamental energy in living things. Imagine what that could do in the wrong hands. The people I'm talking about, they would stop at nothing to control that power. They want to use Ethan, Claire. They want to make him a tool. The weight of his words sank deep into Claire's heart. How do you know all of this? She asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Because I used to be part of that world, Mark said, his tone dark. I was recruited by them. I was tasked with tracking and studying people like Ethan. But when I found out what they planned to do with him, I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't let them use innocent kids like this. I walked away. But they never let go. They've been watching me, waiting for me to slip up. And when they found out about Ethan, he trailed off, his voice thick with regret. Claire's heart raced. So, you're saying they're after us because of you? Mark nodded, his jaw clenched. Yes, but it's more than that. They're after Ethan because he's the key to something bigger. Something far beyond what they've been doing up until now. If they can control him, they could control the future. The car veered off the main road and turned onto a dirt path, leading deeper into a dense forest. Claire could see a small, nondescript building in the distance. Her nerves flared again as she realized they were arriving at another location, another safe house, another temporary refuge. Mark parked the car, cutting the engine. He turned to face Claire. We'll be safe here, but not for long. You need to prepare yourself. The people after us, they won't stop. They have resources, they have power, and they'll stop at nothing to find us. Claire took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I need to know the whole truth, Mark. Everything. I need to understand what's happening. Why this is happening. Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. I knew this day would come. I should have told you sooner. He paused, looking Claire in the eyes. The truth is, the organization I worked for has been trying to unlock the potential of children like Ethan for decades. But Ethan's gift, it's not like any of the others. You don't just heal with him. You can alter life with him. You can rewrite fate. Claire stared at him, confused. Rewrite fate? Mark nodded slowly. Yes. Ethan's gift isn't just about healing. It's about changing the course of events, things that should happen, but don't. Things that should have been lost, but are found again. He can literally change the outcomes of situations. He can make the impossible happen. Claire's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. It was too much to process. But the fear in Mark's eyes, the weight of his words, told her that there was more at play here than she could understand. There's more, Mark continued. The organization believes that with Ethan's ability, they could control the entire course of human history. They believe they can prevent wars, eliminate diseases, control populations, rewrite the very fabric of society. Claire's head spun. And they want to use him for that? To control everything? Yes, Mark said, his voice hard. But it's not just about control. It's about power. Absolute power. A chill ran down Claire's spine. She knew she had to protect Ethan, but she couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. It was too big, too overwhelming. They had no place to hide from something like this. We need to take Ethan somewhere safe, Claire said, her voice trembling. Somewhere no one can find him. Mark looked at her with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. You can't just hide, Claire. They'll find you. They have eyes everywhere. But I won't let them use my son, she said fiercely. I won't let them control him. Mark paused for a moment, as if weighing her words. There may be one way, he said, finally. A way to get Ethan out of their reach. Claire leaned forward. What is it? Mark's gaze softened. There's a place. A hidden community. A group of people who have been helping children like Ethan for years. They know how to protect them, how to keep them hidden from the world. But it's dangerous to get there. It's the last place they would look. Claire didn't hesitate. Take me there. Now. Mark nodded, and without another word, he started the engine. The car pulled back onto the dirt road, and Claire's heart beat faster as they drove toward an unknown future, one where Ethan's gift might be both his salvation and his doom. As they drove into the unknown, Claire realized that the real battle wasn't just about running or hiding, it was about protecting the future. Ethan's future. And no matter what it took, she would never let anyone take that away from him. This final part ties up the core mysteries, answers the questions around Ethan's gift, and sets up the final decision Claire has to make. It deepens the stakes, and her resolve to protect her son at all costs is highlighted. The danger is ever present, but the emotional struggle and the bond between mother and son remain the central themes of the story.